4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's 2 questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the Briefing PM, an hour of the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up between now and 4 o'clock. One of the latest is the government announces a deal to send some channel-crossing asylum seekers 4,500 miles away to Rwanda for processing. We'll get all the latest political reaction to this significant news story from the government. Also coming up, the former Russian president is threatening military action if Sweden or Finland decide to join NATO. One of the latest on what this could mean for the alliance and whether Russia are genuinely being serious. And also we'll be discussing the local elections. It's just a matter of weeks away. How are the government polling? Could they lose lots of seats? Could Labour do well or the Lib Dems? One of the latest from a pollster. Plus, we want to hear from you, as always, on this programme. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at gbnews. All that and so much more over the next hour. But first, at the top of the hour, here's the news.
Good afternoon, it's 3:02. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB Newsroom. The Royal Navy is taking over command from Border Force in the Channel under new government plans to tackle illegal immigration. The Prime Minister has also confirmed asylum seekers will be flown to Rwanda for processing as part of a £120 million deal. Boris Johnson says they'll have the capacity to resettle tens of thousands of people over the coming years, and the scheme will serve as a considerable deterrent. He told a news conference the partnership complies with international obligations, but he's still expecting a legal challenge.
Safe and legal routes for asylum while disrupting the business model of the gangs. Because it means that economic migrants taking advantage of the asylum system will not get to stay in the UK. We're confident that our new migration partnership is fully compliant with our international legal obligations. But nevertheless, we expect this will be challenged in the courts.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer described the plan as a desperate effort to distract from the Prime Minister's Partygate fine.
They're unworkable, they're extortionate, they're going to cost taxpayers billions of pounds, and they just reflect a Prime Minister who's got no grit, no answers to the questions that need answering, and no shame, and I just think Britain deserves better than this.
Ambulance response times and A&E performance in England have dropped to their lowest levels on record. That's as the latest figures show 6.2 million patients are currently on NHS waiting lists, with 23,000 waiting more than 2 years to start routine treatment. Top surgeons are describing the data as shocking. Joe Goulding is a patient with rheumatoid arthritis and has been waiting for various surgeries since the summer of 2018.
This delay will have a long-lasting impact on me for the rest of my life because of the way that the joints now have deteriorated. it isn't just a case of a straightforward operation now, then there needs to be repairs. I don't expect special treatment. I don't want special treatment. I would just like to have fair access.
The UK's medicines regulator has approved the use of the COVID Moderna vaccine in children aged between 6 and 11 years old. Earlier today, a sixth coronavirus vaccine produced by French firm Valneva was also given the green light. The UK is the first country in the world to approve the jab. Russia is warning it will increase its military presence in the Baltic if Sweden and Finland join NATO. The two countries are on the verge of applying for membership. The deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, says if they do, the balance needs to be restored and there'll be no more talk of a nuclear-free region. Meanwhile, Ukraine says a new prisoner swap has been agreed with Russia. 30 Ukrainians are due to return home today. Earlier, the country's military said it hit Russian warship Moskva with a missile, causing serious damage. It reportedly started to sink after ammunition on board the vessel exploded. Moscow claims it's still afloat, but says crew members were evacuated from the ship. Latest figures show almost 16,500 Ukrainian refugees have now arrived in the UK. 13,000 entered under the Ukraine Family Scheme and over 3,000 through Homes for Ukraine sponsorship. The Home Office says it's received just shy of 95,000 applications and so far 25,000 visas have been granted. More than 300 people have been killed in floods on South Africa's east coast. Heavy rains have blocked roads and disrupted shipping in Durban, one of Africa's busiest ports. The country's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, pledged to help after visiting families whose homes have been destroyed. It's been described as one of the worst flooding events in South Africa's history. The Queen is expected to miss the traditional Easter Sunday service at Windsor Castle this weekend because of mobility issues. It's after she missed today's Royal Maundy service for the first time. The Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall represented the monarch, distributing money as part of an ancient tradition to community members from across the country. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to the briefing with Darren.
Thank you very much indeed, Tasman. It is 7 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Thursday afternoon. We're on TV, online and on your DAB digital radio. Now, the big story today is involving Channel migrants because they're going to be flown more than 5,000 miles to Rwanda to help process their asylum claims in what's been branded an offshore facility. It comes as Boris Johnson has warned in a speech in Kent that vile people smugglers are turning the channel into a watery graveyard, with migrants drowning in unseaworthy boats and suffocating in refrigerated lorries. Refugee organisations, on the other hand, though, have criticised the plans as cruel and urged to rethink. Well, in the last couple of hours, we've heard from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. He's been responding to that announcement from the Prime Minister today, and this is what he had to say.
I think we need to see these plans for what they are. It's a desperate announcement by a Prime Minister who just wants to distract from his own law-breaking. They're unworkable, they're extortionate, they're going to cost taxpayers billions of pounds, and they just reflect a Prime Minister who's got no grit, no answers to the questions that need answering, and no shame. And I just think Britain deserves better than this. I think it's a desperate announcement. The true aim of this is just to distract from the law-breaking of the Prime Minister. And that's why I say it shows that he's got no answers, he's got no grip, he's got no shame. It's a desperate announcement, unworkable, extortionate, and Britain really does deserve better than this.
So what's Labour's plan for immigration? How would you end the channel process?
Well, we've been saying for some time that we need to have joined up arrangements with our partners in France. We need a much better Home Office streamlining of applications, but there's no getting away from this today. This is a desperate attempt by the Prime Minister to distract from his own law-breaking and the whole Partygate scandal. It's a Prime Minister with no answers, no grip and no shame.
So
The problem with the plan today is that it is absolutely desperate by a Prime Minister who is trying to deflect and distract from his own law breaking. It's not a workable policy. It's going to be extortionate for taxpayers, costing billions of pounds. And it shows the Prime Minister doesn't have the answers that the country needs, doesn't have a grip, and by doing this in this way today has got no shame.
So on
We've got a Prime Minister who is a lawbreaker and a liar. And I think about all those people who did the right thing, made heart-wrenching decisions, for which they felt very guilty, not going to funerals, not going to weddings, not going to the birth of their own children, or not seeing elderly relatives. And this is a slap in the face for them. So he should resign. And we've now got the pathetic spectacle of Tory lemmings trotting out to defend him. He has no honesty and no integrity, and he should go.
I think that was the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, speaking a little bit earlier, primarily about this plan regarding moving refugees to be processed from Rwanda, but also at the end they're talking about, of course, the Prime Minister and Partygate. Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, is with us in the studio. What do we make of the Prime Minister's plans? It's clear he had to come up with something, given the political pressure, given the numbers that we're seeing, hundreds more yesterday crossing the Channel. Many saying that this is unworkable.
That's certainly the Labour Party line. The Labour Party is saying that it is costly and unworkable, of course, suggesting that it will cost billions of pounds. The government's numbers are slightly less than that, in the hundreds of millions. But, of course, it is obviously a difficult logistical task to ferry people over, or should I say fly people over 5,000 miles once they arrive on these shores. It's interesting to see that the way in which it was sold by the Prime Minister at his press conference earlier this morning was that this is a problem that is growing. This is a problem whereby we've seen the numbers coming on small boats increase and increase year on year, and the Prime Minister was frank. He said that this year will be higher than last year and that this problem will keep growing and people will keep dying in the Channel unless something is done about it. So this is a rather radical solution in order to try and both dissuade those from coming here, but also clamp down on criminal gangs and provide some sort of certainty outside of the legal limbo that people whose asylum claims are rejected find themselves in when they're stuck in the UK, because so often they don't actually leave. However, there has been a bit of instant polling off the back of this. YouGov, in the last few minutes, have released a poll in terms of how people think of this policy. And some in government might be fairly surprised by the results. 35% of the British public support the idea of processing asylum claims offshore in Rwanda, and 42% oppose it. So more Brits, according to YouGov today in the Snap poll, more Brits oppose the idea than support it.
When we look at those images, and we saw them just a couple of seconds ago, of people in pretty small dinghies making a perilous journey. I mean, there's clearly a massive element of desperation there. What seems at the heart of all of this is the governments are frankly trying to dissuade people from coming. They're saying, well, if you come, you're going to end up in Rwanda. But the question is that they're getting those boats because there's very few other available avenues for them to get to the UK outside of the different systems that are in place for unique circumstances like Syria and Ukraine and others. Is this going to dissuade people? But B, is it going to end up potentially just being in the courts or getting bogged down and lots of stuff? And with public opinion, maybe it's not necessarily as strongly backing of this measure as the government think.
It's interesting because in the abstract, this idea was polled a couple of years ago, again, by YouGov. They asked at the time, there were rumours of a government plan about using Ascension Island, a British overseas territory in the mid-Atlantic, for overseas processing of visas. And there was a majority, a qualified majority, of the British public who supported that, not an absolute majority, but a plurality, I should say. But it was 5 points ahead of those who thought it was a bad idea. Potentially, the word Rwanda, in many voters' minds, is associated with the awful situation in that
Genocide.
country 30 years ago. And of course, it was a very, very different place 30 years ago. Now, however, it's a relatively progressive, open society.
Many would say with a slightly dictatorial leader who is, where there's not free media and there's an awful lot of suppression. A country that also has hundreds of thousands of its own refugees from different parts of from Central Africa, and also a place where one suspects that, again, if these people are very keen to come to Britain, they may well be flown to Rwanda, but they will almost certainly try and make the journey again.
That's where the 5,000 miles away bit comes into it, I suppose. But the EU has similar schemes that operate within Turkey and within Libya. So this is really reflecting some of policy that actually the EU has already done, but just a little further afield. But yes, it does sound, frankly, slightly jarring to many voters. And that might be why we're seeing that rejection from that instantaneous snap poll. But ultimately, this is one solution that the government is putting forward.
And we should say this is a trial, isn't it? This is a trial period.
5 years.
For 5 years. But what we should also note is, because we're looking at the boats from the UK Border Force, the other big significant announcement today that's got slightly lost in all of this, is that they are essentially going to lose control of those waters, and the Navy is now going to come in and take over.
It's interesting because we've heard various press releases in the last few years whereby the government was saying the Navy is going to take a greater role. Well, now the Navy is in complete control of the channel, as of today, which will it actually make all that much difference? Do we have the resources? And frankly, what do they do if they meet a boat? This government policy, as Boris Johnson outlined in the press conference today, is still not to tow boats back to France because we don't have an agreement with France. And frankly, the political situation in that country means it's unlikely we will ever get an agreement in the near future with France about returning migrants to that country. If anything, we're more likely to get a deal with Macron, who's not famous for his love of the English or the British, than Marine Le Pen. I mean, the idea, and some commentators in the United Kingdom have this peculiar idea that a very nationalist, almost far-right politician in France would somehow be welcoming refugees back, which is the most peculiar logic. Of course, no, if Marine Le Pen became president of France, we'd have a bigger refugee problem because she would most likely be pushing them out and away to us. So really, when it comes to this situation, there are many critics who say the fact that there isn't a valid, safe channel whereby people can come from anywhere and apply along a legal route without first coming to the United Kingdom creates a big problem here. Now, there are some valid channels, as you rightly mentioned, from Ukraine. We have processing centres in neighbouring countries to Ukraine and some in France now. But ultimately, from other parts of the world, we don't have similar processing centres. And that, to some extent, may contribute to this problem.
Tom, as always, thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood there, our political correspondent, with me in the studio. Let's get the view now from within the Conservative Party, because we're joined by Sir Geoffrey Clifton Brown, the MP for the Cotswolds. Geoffrey, thank you very much, as always, for joining us. Are you in favour of this plan?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Are you in favour of this plan?
Well, it's you played an extensive clip repeating what Keir Starmer said. He said the government had no idea and no plans. From what I heard him say, I would say the Labour Party has no idea and no plans. We've tried repeatedly to give hundreds of millions of pounds to the French. And actually, if anything, the problem's got worse. So you've got to try something else. Now, this plan, I think, is worthy of consideration. What it will do, I think, is make those people traffickers, those people who are organising and in charge of the boats, think twice before they organise people to go on a very perilous journey across the channel on those very flimsy floating boats. So I think this is a plan that's worth trying. Can I just say one other thing, Darren, too? The Conservative Party did a social action programme for a number of years in Rwanda. And I twice went to Rwanda on that social action programme. And I don't think the country is quite as you describe it. It's one of the very few countries in Africa that is democratic. It's a wonderful country. They've got very big-hearted people. It's efficient. And I've no doubt that any arrangements with Rwanda will be dealt with efficiently. So I think this plan is worthy of trying.
Well, the only reason I say that is because the headline in today's Times newspaper, which I'm not entirely sure is against this, has called President Kagame as a despot who's turned Rwanda into Switzerland, who's clamped down on the freedom of press and has carried out extrajudicial killings, including in South Africa. So, I mean, he doesn't seem like a terribly nice person.
Well, I met him twice. It is a democratic country. I'm sure that it's probably not as a sophisticated democracy as the UK or France or America, but nevertheless, it is a democratic country where there are very, very few in Africa. And I would have thought if you were looking for a country in the African region, this was as good a country as you were going to get.
On to the reason behind all of this, because you talked about the criminal gangs there and obviously people putting their lives at risk across the channel. The reason they do that, though, is because we don't, outside of their very unique and individual schemes, we don't have any way that asylum seekers can seek asylum in this country. They can't get here. So wouldn't the solution to this be, which would get rid of the criminal gangs immediately, which would not put anyone else's life at risk, it is to process and allow people to seek asylum when they arrive in the UK?
Well, look, the Ukrainians are not queuing up to go on these boats. They're managing to get here from Ukraine on railways, on lifts in cars. And I think we've got to be really careful about this whole issue. There are two classes of people. There are genuine refugees, people like some of the Ukrainians that are in danger of being shot at any moment. They are genuine refugees. There's another class of people called economic migrants that simply want to come here to better their lifestyle. Now, that really needs to be carefully processed, because whilst our generosity may be endless, our ability to help endless number of people is just not sensible. So I think we've got to distinguish between those two classes of people. And I think genuine refugees, if they really want to, can get to this country.
OK, and just very finally, Sir Geoffrey, sorry, is this because we're looking at pictures of the Border Force boats that, frankly, are now going to have to answer to the Royal Navy. Has there been a failure of the Home Office to a large degree? This problem has just got worse and worse in recent years in terms of the numbers of people putting their lives at risk, that, Priti Patel and the Home Office have really failed in this area.
Well, that is why the Home Office have come up with this new policy. To do two things, really, is to deter economic migrants, people coming here just to better their lifestyle, without first getting proper paperwork in their own country. Because after all, if they're economic migrants, they're not fleeing in persecution for their life, so they've got plenty of time to get the proper paperwork. But secondly, to make sure that we can process applications and quickly. And if people are genuine refugees, they should, of course, be allowed into this country. We've always had a history of being generous to refugees from the Huguenots onwards. But if they are just simply economic migrants and they haven't got the correct paperwork, made the correct application to come to this country on a visa, then they shouldn't come here.
Fascinating stuff. As always, Sir Geoffrey, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And happy Easter to you. That's Sir Geoffrey.
And to you, Darren.
Join us from the Cotswolds. Thank you. Do get in touch, by the way, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at gbnews. A lot of you very animated about this story one way or another, but do get in touch and we'll get to some of those views later in the programme. As you can see, up next, we're going to be talking about Ukraine, Russia, potential that NATO and Finland and Sweden could be joining NATO. Russia, Medvedev there, the former president, warning against it. We'll have a reaction to that story in just a couple of minutes. But before all of that, we're going to take a quick break, including a look ahead to a very special programme, a unique programme here on GB News tomorrow.
Coming up tomorrow at noon.
Welcome to a very special GB News Easter programme. We are invited during this short time to enter into the passion, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's an invitation to take part in the most important part of the Christian life. Happy Easter. Alleluia.
The Meaning of Easter with Calvin Robinson tomorrow at noon on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. It is almost 27 minutes past 3 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Now, the new head of the Russian Security Council and close ally of President Vladimir Putin said the country would have more officially registered adversaries should Sweden and Finland join NATO. It comes after, of course, they suggested they could be doing so in the weeks and months to come. He then went on to issue the threat of the non-nuclear status in the Baltic. This in relation to, of course, what Dmitry Medvedev, he's the former president, was warning Sweden and Finland about all of this. Joining me to discuss it all is Major General Chip Chapman, who joins us down the line. Chip, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just give us a bit of historical context, if you can, about why Sweden and Finland are not members of NATO when, you know, a lot of European countries have signed up already.
Well, the easiest one to look at and puts it really in context is Finland, because, of course, the word Finlandisation became a noun in the British language after the Winter War of November 39 to March 40. And Finlandisation actually meant that a powerful country would caveat the sovereignty of a neighbouring country, particularly its foreign policy. And that is why the states of Eastern and Central Europe determined that they wanted to break away from Russia in the demise of the Soviet Union, because they feared a revanchist authoritarian Russia, which is what we're seeing. So there was a push factor in that they didn't want to be part of the Russian empire and in the orbit of Russia, and the pull factor of NATO, because NATO would support them. The core role of NATO is not as a collective security organization. It is as an organization which will defend the sovereignty of its members if one is attacked. And what the assault in Ukraine has actually done is energize the domestic politics of both Finland and Russia and given the approval rating to join NATO. And it's reinforced the perceptions of Russia as a country which cannot be trusted, and therefore they want their sovereignty to be guaranteed by other people. The same in a way that Ukraine does, because it's still in Ukraine's constitution at the moment that they want to join NATO. And it is still the case that Ukraine would also like to join the EU. Both of those things would Moscow would fear, because I think one of the things that Moscow fears is actually not just Ukraine moving to the West, but it's the West moving towards Russia, and that the kleptocrats and the way that the authoritarian state in Russia works would be called out.
And so the response, and we heard this, didn't we, from Dmitry Medvedev today, they say is going to be pretty strong. They're not terribly happy. I mean, what is that? Is that potentially nuclear submarines in the Baltic Sea, for example?
Well, it might be. I mean, what you have to be careful of is going to the maximalist sort of position, as lots of media outlets do, in saying that this is, he's going to use nuclear weapons or something like that. Medvedev didn't say that at all. He said he would reinforce the Baltic area, including deployment potentially of nuclear weapons in that area. That's a completely different thing than saying that we're going to put sort of nuclear forces at strike alert or anything like that. It just reinforces the fact, though, that it's Russia who wants to be the country which determines what its neighbours do. And Finland and Sweden don't want their sovereignty caveated by Russia. They want to be able to make their own decisions in the same way that Ukraine wants to make its own decisions. And that's what should be happening in the sovereign world. That's actually what the Budapest Memorandum of 1994 was supposed to do in guaranteeing the independence of Ukraine, and also what the Helsinki Agreement in 1975, which Russia signed up to again to establish the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, did, when that also guaranteed the borders of all sovereign states in Europe. Both of those, Russia has attempted to tear up and rewrite the security architecture of Europe. It is not for Russia to do that.
And just very finally, Chip, let's look at the conflict itself. Lots of reports overnight that one of the flagship warship of the Russians in the Black Sea had been sunk or certainly badly damaged. Russia, I see this afternoon, is saying, the Defence Ministry, that the ship is still afloat, denied it's been attacked by Ukrainian forces, though it's been reported that Turkish and Romanian authorities have confirmed the ship has been sunk. Either way, this seems to be a pretty bitter blow for the Russians again.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is that there are always four sides to a story: your side, their side, the truth, and what really happened. And that's from Russo, of course, and we'll find out that. But you can't hide what happened here. It's either damaged, it's sinking, or it's sunk. It either was sinking or sunk by Ukrainian Neptune missiles. I don't take the line from Russia that it could have been an ammunition accident and the crew all safely evacuated. I mean, that would show just terrible procedural naval drills, that you weren't able to do any damage control and firefighting. I cannot believe, with the weather and sea state, that they successfully got 500 people off without doing some damage control and firefighting. We will know what the truth is in this. And if it happens, there's serious consequences, because what it really shows is the ability of the Ukrainians to reach out and strike across the maritime flank. And it really puts the death knell on any idea of Odessa being an amphibious operation by the Russians in the future.
Fascinating stuff. Great analysis, as always. Major General Chip Chapman from Salisbury, thank you so much indeed for joining us. And since I'm doing it to everyone today, happy Easter to you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Darren.
OK, we're going to pause there on GB News. Let's bring you up to date with the news at just after 3:30.
Good afternoon, it's 3:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Royal Navy is taking over command from Border Force in the Channel under new government plans to tackle illegal immigration. The Prime Minister has also confirmed asylum seekers will be flown to Rwanda for processing as part of a £120 million deal. Boris Johnson says they'll have the capacity to resettle tens of thousands of people over the coming years and that the scheme will serve as a considerable deterrent. Ambulance response times and A&E performance in England have dropped to their lowest levels on record. That's as the latest figures show 6.2 million patients are currently on NHS waiting lists, with 23,000 waiting more than 2 years to start routine treatment. Ukraine says a new prisoner swap has been agreed with Russia. 30 Ukrainians are due to return home today. Earlier, the country's military said it hit Russian warship Moskva with a missile, causing serious damage. It reportedly started to sink after ammunition on board the vessel exploded. Moscow claims it's still afloat, but says crew members were evacuated from the ship. The Queen, who has for the first time missed the Royal Maundy service, is also expected to miss the Easter Sunday event because of mobility issues. The Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall represented the monarch today, handing out Maundy money to community members from across the country. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Stay with us. The Briefing with Darren will be back in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Very welcome back to GB News and The Briefing. It is 23 minutes to 4 o'clock. Now, a Snap YouGov poll has found that 57% of people believe the Prime Minister and the Chancellor should resign following their COVID fines, with 3 out of every 4 believing that the Prime Minister knowingly lied about it. Just 12% believe he did not. Well, on voters' reaction with these polls, it suggests that the fines could have an impact on the local elections coming up in just a couple of weeks' time. Is it, though? Let's have a look and a talk to the head of polling, political polling, at Opinion with Chris Curtis. I should apologise. Chris, very good afternoon to you. We saw that Snap poll, didn't we, from YouGov? I know you guys have done a pretty similar one. Is this really going to change the public mood? Because there is a sense that kind of you either believe the Prime Minister or you don't, and you've probably done that for the last couple of months.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think it would be incorrect to say that Partygate hasn't damaged the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party. Pretty much all of the polling shows it has. The Labour Party has led nearly consistently in the polls since December, and the Prime Minister's approval ratings have fallen quite dramatically. But I'm not sure if there's much more damage it can do, and it's for the reason that you've said. We were polling a couple of months ago, do you think the Prime Minister broke the rules? Do you think the Prime Minister had told the truth? And back then, people, weren't believing a Prime Minister, a word the Prime Minister said. I think more people said that they thought the moon landings were faked than thought that the Prime Minister was telling the truth about what happened in Partygate. So I don't think these police fines are necessarily going to move the dial much further. The question for the Conservatives is, given all of the damage that this has done, can they rebuild from here? Can they use a message to sort of start to bounce back? Probably not in time for the May local elections, to be honest, but can they do it in time for the next general election?
Let's move on, if we can, to Rwanda, because pretty significant announcement today. The Labour Party clearly accusing the Prime Minister of trying to distract voters. Interestingly, Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, was suggesting earlier that there's been a Snap opinion poll about it, and it's found that actually not a majority, but most voters, when polled, or a greater number, were not in favour of this measure. Is that your sense, and do we have any understanding why that would be?
Yeah, I mean, and actually this has been true for some time when you've sort of, obviously this is a very specific country and a very specific policy, but lots of these ideas have been being floated, and the public are generally pretty evenly divided on whether they support or oppose it. Depending on the specifics of a policy, sometimes you get a few more support, a few more oppose. This happens to be one of those occasions when slightly more people oppose the policy than support it. But politics isn't necessarily just about sort of, the support or the opposition to specific policy. It's also, for lack of a better term, about vibes. And the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister is trying to give off a message here. And it's, you didn't trust us on Partygate and what we did there. But again, we want to be the party that you remember that gets things done. So you may not always like our methods, you may not always support our policy, the way we do things, but we get things done, whether that's getting Brexit done, whether that's getting the vaccine rollout done, and in this case, whether that's stopping migrants from crossing the channel. And I think that's basically what they're trying to do with their messaging and shift the focus back to that area. I'm not convinced it will be successful, but at least I think that is the strategy.
And just very finally, Chris, in terms of the impact, you touched upon a little earlier about the local elections coming up on May 5th. The expectation is the Conservative Party aren't probably going to do that well, but they don't need to do that well in the sense they're not defending that many seats. So the actual impact of these elections in terms of the electoral cycle is quite minimal. Is that correct? If that is, where should we be looking at? Because people have suggested London, for example, could be important, things like Wandsworth and Westminster, which the Conservatives have held for a very long period of time.
I mean, look, the local elections are probably not going to be as bad for the Conservatives as the national polls indicate. And there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, these seats were last fought in 2018 when the Conservatives were also doing pretty badly in the polls after Theresa May's pretty disastrous 2017 election result. And of course, it's about the number of seats gained or lost. So if we're comparing back to a time when the Conservatives were also doing badly, they might not lose so many seats compared to that. Secondly, 40% of the seats that are up are in London, almost all of which are already held by Labour. And, actually what we've seen in the polling is that there hasn't been very much of a swing to Labour in London, at least not as much of a swing as there has been in the rest of the country. So actually the result overall might not be as disastrous as the headline polls suggest. In terms of where to look, I actually think the least interesting places to look is Wandsworth and Westminster. I mean, we've talked for years about getting outside the Westminster bubble, and I think actually when it comes to local elections, we definitely need to get outside the Westminster and Wandsworth bubble because there's lots of local factors there. They're incredibly weird seats, and they don't really tell us very much about what's happening in the rest of the country. I'd look towards potentially some of those more red wall areas to see if Labour's starting to fight back in some of those places. And the other really interesting place is going to be Scotland. The Tories came second in Scotland in the last set of local elections that held there. We're now expecting Labour to take second place. Are they actually able to take some seats back off the Tories and crucially take some seats back off the SNP? Because winning back Scotland is, going to be really important to Labour if they do want to pull off a miraculous majority at the next general election.
Fascinating stuff, as always, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. Chris Curtis, happy Easter to you. Thank you for that. GB Views at GB News. Thank you, mate. GB Views at gbnews.uk. Lots of you getting in touch. Very animated about the migrant story, the changing plans, sending migrants, asylum seekers, effectively to be processed in Rwanda. Marianne says that Keir Starmer rattles on about how wrong the new illegal immigration policy is, but never offers an alternative answer to the problem. People might have more respect for him if he came forward with something positive and meaningful to say. Stuart says, I think that it will work out cheaper in the long run sending them to Rwanda than to put them up in hotels over here and to feed them. George says, a typical rant from Starmer, pulling Boris down and criticising his policies without offering anything better. That's a pretty consistent message from you guys. Dam says, great move by Boris and pretty to introduce offshore processing in Rwanda. This will in time save money and prevent deaths. A Brexit success. Typical Starmer being outraged at something the majority of the public want and taking back control of our borders. Starmer should essentially come up with new ideas. GB Views at gbnews.uk or indeed tweet us at gbnews. Maybe you think it's not a good plan at all. Do get in touch and we'll get to some of those a little later on in the programme. But let's return to this story now because we've been talking, haven't we, about that plan to send refugees, asylum seekers 5,000 miles away. Well, joining me to discuss all of this is the Liberal Democrats Home Affairs spokesperson. That's Alistair Carmichael, MP. Alistair, thank you very much indeed again for joining us here on GB News. We know the government has had to tackle this problem. I'm sure you accept that it is not great that hundreds and hundreds of people are risking their lives travelling across the Channel, frankly, almost every day. This is a solution. It might not work, but it's at least worth giving a go, which is what the government is doing.
Well, I think it would make more sense to tackle the problem at its source, and that is to say that we should be offering people safe and legal routes in order to come here, so that you work with other countries in the region, you offer the facility for people to register as refugees, to have their claims assessed, and then to come to this country. And we're not doing that at the moment, and that's why you are getting this dreadful trade in the hands of people smugglers across the Channel, which puts hundreds and thousands of lives at risk every week. And that's what's got to change here. What you've got here is something which actually lacks a bit of respect and humanity in the way that it treats people, and is actually going to be that much more expensive at the end of the day. We calculate on the basis of the Australian experience it could cost up to £1.4 billion at a time when we're struggling to help people with the cost of their energy bill and other cost of living crises. And it's not going to stop people making that journey. It's just going to mean that when they get to this country through the people smugglers' routes, then they are going to be shipped off to Rwanda, a country where, incidentally, we're already taking hundreds of asylum seekers every year because of Rwanda's difficulties and their human rights record.
Sorry to quickly, but isn't that the point? As in, the British government do have schemes for Afghanistan, for Ukraine, for Hong Kong, for Syria, for asylum seekers fleeing conflicts there. If you are coming from Rwanda to the UK to seek asylum, the whole point, the Dublin Convention, the EU's Dublin Convention, the EU adhered to, is that you should seek refuge in the first country that you come to. I mean, there's no way if you're leaving Rwanda, or indeed anywhere else in sub-Saharan Africa, or the Middle East, that Britain is the first.
That's something which has sort of taken root, but it's not actually what's in the convention. And, we can't expect to take all refugees from everywhere, but we have to accept that we've got a responsibility as one of the world's biggest economies with the history that we have around the world to offer safe and legal routes. That's the way that you will get rid of people smugglers, in exactly the same way as America got rid of bootleggers in the 1930s by ending prohibition.
But the point is...
The industry that is people smuggling is one that is created by the system that this government currently operates.
But the whole point is, Alistair, the government would argue that they have got...
system work much better is actually to get the Home Office working effectively. When Priti Patel became Home Secretary, there were 52,000 people.
That's fine. I'm allowed, hopefully, to ask a question here,
Alistair.
Alistair.
To 60,000 just by virtue of her and her department's incompetence. Get the basics right before you start coming up with big schemes about shipping people off to third countries or making wave machines or using high frequency sonic devices in order to push people back.
Okay, well, I mean, I think the government is not going to involve in that. They've ruled out that possibility. No, but let me. I have to ask. Come on, Alistair. I have to ask you a question. You can't just filibuster this whole interview.
Ridiculous of all.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask.
Down the English Channel. You know,
Alistair. Let me ask you a question, please.
Any compassionate system wouldn't even entertain these ideas for a second, but they are given serious consideration by Priti Patel and her colleagues in the Home Office.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a whole world of difference between essentially kind of coming up with ideas and then implementing them. The whole point of government, I think, is to come up with ideas, even if they seem strange, wild or unethical at the time. It is always, of course, worth considering a range of options. But let me put it this to you, that the government has a way of managing asylum claims in particular areas. I've mentioned Ukraine and Syria and Afghanistan in the past. That the problem is, for lots of people in this country, is that they look at people making that journey. They say that it is perfectly safe to stay in France, or indeed many other countries they've travelled through. And in addition to that, that lots of these people are not asylum seekers. They are economic migrants. They're taking advantage of Britain's hospitality. They are staying in hotels that cost millions of pounds every year. And that's not acceptable. There has to be an act of deterrence to stop that from happening. And if they are genuine refugees in particular areas, there are means of safe passage to Britain, as we're seeing with the Ukrainian refugee scenario at the moment, or indeed with the Afghanistan programme that's in place.
Well, first of all, far be it from me to let the facts get in the way of a good scare story, but in fact the Home Office's own figures show that 98% of those people coming across the Channel are asylum seekers. They claim asylum when they get here, and the vast majority of those applications for asylum are then granted. So these are not people, for the most part, the overwhelming part, who are economic migrants. And yes, we do have safe routes for some countries, and it has to be said, though, that because of Home Office incompetence, even the willingness to offer a safe route to people coming from Ukraine is such that we're not actually able to get them into this country. So it goes back to the efficiency and the ability of Priti Patel in running the Home Office, or the incompetence in running the Home Office at the moment. But, if you are to offer safe and legal routes for some countries, then why do you not offer it as a default system? That would be the sensible thing, and it would mean that you would actually have a system that treated people fairly, that was able to regulate the numbers coming to this country, because we would be cooperating with other countries, and at the end of the day, you would have £1.4 billion to spend on helping people in this country meet the costs of heating and the other costs of living that are going through the roof at the moment.
You've made that point.
This, Alistair, I'm afraid, just looks to me...
We're going to have to wrap it up because we're running out of time, and I've got one more guest to get to. But thank you very much indeed for joining us, and have a good Easter. Alistair Carmichael, the Lib Dems Home Affairs spokesperson, joined us from Scotland. I don't know whether he could hear us or not, but he was certainly verbose in his response. It is 51 minutes past 3 o'clock. Let's turn once again just to the local elections before we do go, because they are just a few weeks away, and there are suggestions that Labour is polling in the capital 30 points ahead of the Conservatives. That's a pretty big lead. It could see London boroughs such as Wandsworth, Barnet, as well as Croydon, fall, and even potentially Westminster. All this, of course, in the wake of a pretty difficult time for the government, not least of all with the cost of living crisis and those allegations around Partygate. Well, joining me now in the studio is the member for the London Assembly, Tony Devenish. Tony, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's pretty tough, isn't it, for the Conservatives in the capital at the moment?
Of course it's tough, but the reality is council services are so important. If you want good council services for the most vulnerable in your community, you want low council tax, and you want your streets clean, you've got a choice. It's democracy. You can vote Conservative on May the 5th. If you don't, you will wake up with a Liberal or more likely a Labour council, and those services will be worse. It's a fact.
Well, I'm sure they would disagree with the factual part of that, but the point is, why have the Conservatives lost the capital? I mean, it's not that long ago since the Prime Minister was Mayor of London, and yet over the past decade, Conservative support has ebbed away, almost collapsed in many parts of our capital city. Why is that?
That's a very, very hard question to answer. But the reality is I'm out 4 times a day knocking on doors right across West London, across Westminster, across Kensington, Chelsea, and across Hammersmith and Fulham. You'd be surprised, actually. It's far more nuanced a picture than you're inferring. Actually, Conservative support, because we have 2 excellent councils in the Royal Borough, Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster, the support is holding up on the main. I'm not complacent. And the reality is, yes, people do mention national issues, but most of my voters are quite sophisticated. They realise this is about low council tax and quality council services. It's not about Boris Johnson versus Keir Starmer.
Isn't council tax going up, though?
Council tax in Westminster is only going up by 1%. It's the lowest council tax in the country, and if you don't want to vote for it, you will lose it on May the 5th. Labour will put council tax up.
Is it maybe one of the reasons is that there's a disconnect between people's the offering from the national government, which is raising taxes to the greatest burden in 70 years? Do you think that's hitting your support? That if you wanted to support a party that cuts taxes, you wouldn't be supporting the current government?
Well, you wouldn't be supporting Labour or the Liberals, would you? Let's face it. The reality is Conservative councils provide value for money and they help the most vulnerable. Our services are excellent. And the reality is only 1/3 of people tend to vote in local elections. And this is democracy. You know, get out there and vote. And I hope GB News voters are more likely to vote for my party.
Well, we'll see about that. Tony, as always, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Tony Devenish there joining us in the studio. Let's end. We've got about a minute left on the programme about your views. Lots and lots of people getting in touch about Rwanda and the migration plans. Eileen says, I thoroughly support the Prime Minister's plan to deal with the above in Rwanda. Ridiculous situation. We're paying France to do nothing. They are illegal immigrants being held up. Julia says, I'm delighted these people are going to Rwanda. Absolutely great news. They should stop the traffickers. Alan says, when are the lefties going to wake up and acknowledge that an open-door immigration policy is impossible? Those who enter the country illegally should be deported. And Matthew says, I've done my own Snap poll, and essentially everyone is in support of this. It must be said that, a lot of people, clearly our viewers, are in favour of it. Others aren't. We're reflecting different political views. GBviews at gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at GBnews. Well, that is it from me for today, and indeed this week. Arlene Foster is in this chair at 3 o'clock tomorrow. Colin Brazier is up next between 4 and 6. Have a very, very nice Easter. I'll see you next week. I'll leave you with the weather. Goodbye.
Hello, I'm Helen Roberts. For most of us this Easter weekend, there will be some warm spells of sunshine around at times, just turning a little more unsettled as the weekend progresses, particularly into Easter Monday. But until then, high pressure is dominating our weather. There is this weather front out to the west. This will bring a change as the weekend progresses, but it's slow progress. So until then, there's plenty of fine weather around. Through this evening and overnight, clear spells, some patchy cloud and some thicker cloud across parts of northwest Scotland, perhaps thick enough for a few outbreaks of patchy light rain. Also some mist, fog and low cloud developing around some coasts, and that will be with us first thing tomorrow. But it will tend to lift and break as the day progresses tomorrow. 1 or 2 coastal areas may just hold on to some mist and low cloud right the way throughout the day, and we will tend to see slightly more in the way of cloud across some western areas for Good Friday, but elsewhere plenty of warm spells of sunshine around. Now, we will see some quite sharp showers developing across parts of Northern Ireland through the afternoon on Good Friday, and later in the day developing across parts of southern Scotland and northern England too, but elsewhere plenty of warm sunshine around. And in fact, talking of temperatures, it could be the warmest day of the year so far, with temperatures perhaps reaching 22 Celsius in parts of the southeast. Now, overnight Friday, again, a mixture of clear spells and some patchy cloud. Still a few showers in parts of the north and northwest, but a lot of dry weather around again, and it won't be a particularly cold night. Temperatures holding up fairly well. And that takes us into Saturday, which on the whole is another fine-looking day for many of us. There will be some bright or sunny spells around and a lot of dry weather into the weekend. So just to recap then, Saturday stays fine for most of us, clouding over from the west though on Sunday and turning cooler on Monday.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives.